Friends, hi, welcome to day 28, also including yesterday, day 27's readings. Really sorry again about that. It's been very intense with work recently, so I haven't been able to get what I needed to get done yesterday. But today's readings will catch up, so we're not behind at all. And we've now come to the end of week 4. And we're also at the end of Genesis today. We finish off Genesis, but let's go through very briefly. I'm not going to go through verse by verse explaining everything, but just picking out a few key points. So in Genesis chapter 47, verse 9, something that strikes me: Pharaoh asked Joseph how old he was. Pharaoh asked Jacob how old he was, and Jacob replied, "My years of pilgrimage are 130." He didn't say, "I'm 130, but he specified that his age was his years of pilgrimage. And friends, how do we see our life? Do we see life like Jacob as being a pilgrimage? It's all about a journey that is set apart for God. And then, a couple of chapters later, chapter 49, verse 33, I notice again that when Jacob dies, it doesn't just say that he died. It says when Jacob died, he was gathered to his people. Now, are we people whose lives, our work, are right through to our death, are going to be set apart for God? On into chapter 50, and we see the death of Joseph towards the end of Genesis. Joseph dies. Now it turns out that in the end, Joseph was a good bloke. Everyone liked him. In the end, his brothers and all of Egypt bowed down to him as Joseph dreamed initially. But it wasn't until God had worked about a big character change in him. And maybe there's things that we feel that God has got lined up for us to do. And yet it's not until we align ourselves with God and with the people that He needs us to be before those plans can fully be worked out. So today we finish Genesis. We've come through to the end of chapter 50. Tomorrow we start in Exodus, which will be a whole new journey through that chapter. But Genesis is the book of beginnings. And in Genesis, Genesis sets the scene basically for the whole of the rest of the Bible, and it speaks to the entire human race. In Genesis we see God that creates the world from nothing just by speaking. We see God being intimately involved. That same God that spoke the world into being is intimately involved in His creation. He's in dialogue with man, and faithfully He guides, He protects, and He provides for His people. And that ties in with our psalm. Psalm 16 verses 7 and 8, it says, "I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night my heart instructs me. I have set the Lord always before me. Because He is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken." And that's the God that we see in Genesis, that God that is always before us. And then Genesis also, it introduces the idea of justice, of being the need to be looking out for each other, and also the idea of surrendering everything that we have to follow God. So friends, I hope you've enjoyed reading through Genesis. Again, tomorrow we'll start off in Exodus, which will have challenges of its own, and into Matthew today. In chapter 18, Jesus is answering the question that is put to him: who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And his answer is that children are the greatest, or those that are like children. Now children have simple faith. They're not like the Pharisees who are out kind of trying to nitpick or be uptight about kind of the outward things or focus on. Children just trust. They believe. They're simple in a sense. They don't ask too many questions. They'll believe what you tell them. Or most do. My 3-year-old is now getting to the stage of asking why for everything. But Jesus is saying, whoever has that simple trust, that simple childlike faith, whoever is like a child in that regard is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes that child also welcomes Jesus. And then he goes on to talk about things that cause us to stumble, and he says that they are there. We need to be realistic. Let's not pretend that they're not there, but instead let's be taking drastic measures to avoid them. So he says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. If your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. Let's not be putting ourselves in those situations. And then a little bit later on, still in chapter 18, he talks about the wandering sheep, the parable of the wandering sheep. That's in verse 10. Now he goes into a little bit more detail about this parable in Luke's Gospel. There's kind of 3 parables there in a row that tell the same story in 3 different ways, going into different levels of detail. So we'll look at it more when we get to it in Luke. But what it does tell us is it shows us something of the character of God. It shows us that God would actively go looking for one person, not just for 99 sheep, but if one of those sheep gets lost. It shows that God is concerned not just for the masses, but he's concerned for the individual, and he would actively go searching for the one. That is how important we are to God. Friends, enjoy your day, and I will see you tomorrow. God bless.